Hello. Hello everyone and welcome to the stream. Hopefully I've caught you at a good time. Hopefully the music's alright. I've been listening to it a little bit. It's alright. It's better than the other things that I had picked out, which I didn't end up liking, so. How is everyone? Are you ready to continue the Nutcracker? I'm not sure where we left off since it was a while ago, but I'm ready. Except that I'm not ready because I have to continue eating my lunch and I'm gonna eat a sandwich. Hi Terry, how are you? I wrote that description myself. Hopefully it kind of covers the highlights, but oh well, if not. Lunch first, not. Do you have anything for lunch, Terry? I got a phone call, but they didn't leave a message. I feel like the number is familiar, but I'm not entirely sure. Tara has not eaten today. Why not? 2 missed calls? No, there is a voicemail. Meow. Hi, Boo. Hold on a sec. I'm gonna listen to this voicemail. It might be important. So, I'm going to mute the mic. This is dumb. It's for pictures that I already picked up. It's freaking long, too. I don't need that. Every time I think it's a job thing, and then it turns out to be something not that important. So why have you not eaten? Why have you not eaten, Terry? They just want you to have more pictures. I don't know why, because some of them didn't turn out very good. And they're supposed to be like Christmas things, so it's kind of disappointing. Haven't gotten around to it. I would make you a sandwich if I could. It's not very exciting, it's just PB&J with some kind of dry bread. Well, this has now become an eating stream. Good. The bot did announce. Oops. Social eating stream hype. Well, not quite heard a version like this of this song before. Yeah. Do you need to, get food while I'm eating? Twixie poo. So sweet. You know what? Want me to do something? Kind of doing Twitch maintenance while I'm eating. I like this version better. This one. Oh. This is my favorite Christmas song. Okay, there we go. Hey, Ann. How are you? Good to see you. I'm currently eating before I start reading. How you doing, boo? So the stream isn't very exciting right now, I'm afraid. What are you watching? Bring the boo. My hands are full. I can't pick her up right now. She's not in here anymore. I don't see her. I look pretty? Didn't you get your eyes checked? Well, thank you for saying, but you're crazy. I don't even have makeup on or anything. Oh. What happened? My webcam froze? Or, okay. That was weird. I don't know what happened. Well, thank you. You're crazy. You're pretty. You're beautiful. Boo, what are you doing? Boo boo. Maybe she is in here. You're sweet, Nicole. Thank you. I wish I could give you a hug. Hold on, I'm gonna see what Boo's doing. I feel like she's getting up to no good. What were you doing, Boo? What are you doing? I don't know. I don't know what she's doing. I don't even know why I have the headphones on right now. I don't really need them. I'm almost done. She's in the hallway looking at things. She's just sitting there looking around. I don't know what she's doing. Guys, I had really bad dreams last night. Okay, Terry, no worries. Be safe, take your time. Miss you already. Am I missing anything? Do you like the Snapchats I send to Boo? Should I keep sending them? I don't want to, like, overwhelm your Snapchats. Yeah. Okay, yes. Whenever I have bad dreams, I always feel like I didn't even sleep. Because it just felt stressful, you know? Okay, I will keep them coming. Okay. It doesn't seem that delayed to me. Not any more than usual, I guess. You are totally fine. Welcome back, Terry. You're not lazy. I don't know what you're talking about. When's your next stream, Terry? Last playing Pokemon. Oh, I guess there's a delay. There we go. A Christmas Story. Oh, cool. Hello, Veronica. I'm saying hi. I don't know that I've actually talked to you, but hello. I'm sure you're great because you're In's friend, so you have to be great. I really need to wash my water bottle. So, tonight's the last night of ballet class for the year. So I will be washing my water bottle over the break. It's not my favorite movie, unpopular opinion, but Keegan's dad really loves it. And so, hello, why did you leave me? Avicii? Avicii? I am fit. Okay, hello, Cobalt. Bolton. I like your guys' names. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, A Christmas Story. Keegan's dad really likes it, so... My nose bleeding? Keegan's dad really likes it, and so we watch it with him sometimes, and we have seen the Christmas Story house in Cleveland, Ohio. That's where they filmed it, of all places, even though... Doesn't it take place in, like, Wisconsin or something? I don't know. Hello, Draman. I don't know if I'm saying your name right. I'm not sure. Welcome to the stream. Welcome for joining. I hope you guys are doing well. Indiana. Okay, yeah. Well, they filmed it in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places, and we've been to the house. I'll post that picture in Discord. I have no idea what's happening with all the new people, but you're welcome for joining. I have not heard of mole rats in Fallout. I haven't played Fallout. My husband has played... Oh, you're stuck on a boss. Oh. My husband has played Fallout. And to answer your question, that is a great idea to read A Night Before Christmas. That's a great idea. I'm not sure if I will be able to get to it this year, just because I'm barely into... Can't even see how much. I'm barely into the Nutcracker. So, I have to finish that before Christmas, and I'm not sure how long that's going to take. Good luck with your boss. It's your boy. I hope you beat him. Actually, you know what? I think I know what the mole rats are, because I've watched people play Fallout. Maybe I'm thinking... No, I'm thinking of Borderlands. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm thinking of Borderlands. Also haven't played that game. Anyways, welcome for lurking in. I'm gonna go ahead and start reading. And I'm sorry to hear that your mom passed away. Jaman. J-Man. I'm not sure. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. My best friend lost her mom as a kid, and I know it's tough. I am wishing you love and light, and I hope things get better for you. Dr. Terror has heard of mole rats. Hi, Boo. You guys want Kitty now? Okay, come here, Boo Boo. Come here. They want to see you. Come here, Boo. She's running away. No? Okay. Okay, come here. Okay. Hi, say hi to everybody, Boo. Hello. She hates being picked up, so she hates this. Hi, everyone. She's like, put me down, put me down. I hope you saw that, Nicole. Ow! Ow, ow, ow! Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Everybody wanted to see you. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to get started. Let me know how the volume is in connection with my reading. Claws are happening. Hey Lexi, how are you? Welcome for joining. Thank you for shouting out. Heartless Shroom, volume is good. Last playing God of War, which I have not seen or played, but I've heard it's very popular. Didn't it win Game of the Year this year or something? I don't know how that works. Okay, so we last left off on a section called Wonderful Events. And I think I spelled Drosselmeyer wrong. Godfather Drosselmeyer gave Mary the Nutcracker. And that's kind of where we left off. Dad of War. Dad of War. Okay. I do not know, my dear little friends, whether you remember that I spoke of a certain large cupboard with glass windows in which the children's toys were locked up. This cupboard was on the right side of the door of the judge's own room. Mary was still a baby in the cradle, and Fritz had only just begun to walk. when the judge had that cupboard made by a very skillful carpenter who put such brilliant glass in the frames that the toys appeared 1,000 times finer when ranged on the shelves than when they were held in the hand. Upon the top shelf of all, which neither Fritz nor Mary could reach, the beautiful pieces of workmanship of Godfather Drosselmeyer were placed. Immediately beneath was the shelf containing the picture books, and the 2 lower shelves were given to Fritz and Mary, who filled them in the way they liked best. It seemed, however, to have been tacitly agreed upon between the 2 children that Fritz should hold possession of the higher shelf of the 2, for the marshalling of his troops, and that Mary should keep the lower shelf for her dolls and their households. This arrangement was entered into on the eve of Christmas Day. Fritz placed his soldiers upon his own shelf, and Mary, having thrust Miss Rose into a corner, gave the bedroom formed by the lowest shelf to Miss Clara, with whom she invited herself to pass the evening and enjoy a supper of sugar plums. Miss Clara, on casting her eyes around, saw that everything was in proper order, her table well spread with sugar plums and conserved fruits, and her nice white bed with its white counterpane all so neat and comfortable. She therefore felt very well satisfied with her new apartment. While all these arrangements were being made, the evening wore away. Midnight was approaching. Godfather Drosselmeyer had been gone a long time, and yet the children could not be persuaded to quit the cupboard. Contrary to custom, it was Fritz that yielded first to the persuasion of his parents, who told him that it was time to go to bed. "Well," said he, after all the exercise which my poor hussars have had today, they must be fatigued, and as those excellent soldiers all know their duty towards me, and as, so long as I remain here, they will not close their eyes, I must retire." With these words, and having given them the watchword to prevent them from being surprised by a patrol of the enemy, Fritz went off to bed. But this was not the case with Mary, and as her mamma, who was about to follow her husband to their bedchamber, desired her to tear herself away from the dearly beloved cupboard, little Mary said, "Only one moment, dear mamma, a single moment. Do let me finish all I have to do here. There are 100 or more important things to put to rights, and the moment I have settled them, I promise to go to bed." Mary requested this favor in so touching and plaintive a tone. She was, moreover, so glad and obedient a child, that her mother did not hesitate to grant her request. Nevertheless, as Miss Trudgeon had already gone upstairs to get Mary's bed ready, the judge's wife, thinking that her daughter might forget to put out the candles, performed that duty herself, leaving only a light in the lamp hanging from the ceiling. "Do not be long before you go to your room, dear little Mary," said the judge's wife, "for if you remain up too long, you will not be able to rise at your usual hour tomorrow morning." With these words, the lady quitted the room and closed the door behind her. Yes, it says quitted. The moment Mary found herself alone, she bethought herself, above all things, of her poor little Nutcracker, for she contrived to keep it in her arms, wrapped up in her pocket handkerchief. She placed him upon the table very gently, unrolled her handkerchief, and examined his chin. The Nutcracker still seemed to suffer much pain, and appeared very cross. "Ah, my dear little fellow," she said in a low tone, "do not be angry, I pray, because my brother Fritz hurt you so much. He had no evil intention, rest well assured. Only his manners have become rough, and his heart is a little hardened by his soldier's life. Otherwise, he's a very good boy, I can assure you, and I know that when you are better acquainted with him, you'll forgive him. Besides, to atone for the injury which he has done you, I'll take care of you, which I will do so attentively that in a few days you'll be quite well. As for putting in the teeth again and fastening your chin properly, that is the business of Godpapa Drosselmeyer, who perfectly understands those kinds of things." Mary could say no more, for the moment she pronounced the name of her godfather Drosselmeyer, the Nutcracker, to whom this discourse was addressed, made so dreadful a grimace, and his eyes suddenly flashed so brightly, that the little girl stopped short in affright, and stepped a pace back. But as the Nutcracker immediately afterwards resumed its amiable expression and its melancholy smile, she fancied that she must have been the sport of an illusion, and that the flame of the lamp, agitated by a current of air, had thus disfigured the little man. She even laughed at herself, saying, "I am indeed very foolish to think that this wooden puppet could make faces to me. Come, let me draw near the poor fellow, and take that care of him which he requires. Having thus mused within herself, Mary took the puppet once more in her arms, drew near the cupboard, knocked at the glass door, which Fritz had closed, and said to the new doll, I beg of you, Miss Clara, to give up your bed to my poor Nutcracker who is unwell, and to shift for yourself on the sofa tonight. Remember that you are in excellent health yourself, as your round and rosy cheeks sufficiently prove. Moreover, a night is soon past, the sofa is very comfortable, and there will not be many dolls in Nuremberg as well lodged as yourself. Miss Clara, as you may well suppose, did not utter a word, but it struck Mary that she seemed very sulky and discontented. But Mary, whose conscience told her that she had treated Miss Clara in the most considerate manner, used no further ceremony with her, but, drawing the bed towards her, placed the Nutcracker in it, covering him with the clothes up to the very chin. She then thought that she knew nothing as yet of the real disposition of Miss Clara, whom she had only seen for a few hours, but that as Miss Clara had appeared to be in a very bad humor at losing her bed, some evil might happen to the poor invalid if he were left with so insolent a person. She therefore placed the bed, with the Nutcracker in it, upon the second shelf, close by the ridge where Fritz's cavalry were quartered. Then, having laid Miss Clara upon the sofa, she closed the cupboard and was about to rejoin Miss Trudgeon in the bedchamber, when all around the room the poor girl heard a variety of low scratching sounds coming from behind the chairs, the store, and the cupboard. The large clock which hung against the wall, and which was surmounted by a large gilt owl instead of a cuckoo, as is usual with old German clocks, began that usual whirring sound which gives warning of striking, and yet it did not strike. Mary glanced toward it, and saw that the immense gilt owl had drooped its wings in such a way that they covered the entire clock, and that the bird thrust forward as far as it could its hideous cat-like head, with the round eyes and the crooked beak. Then the whirring sound of the clock became louder and louder, and gradually changed into the resemblance of a human voice, until it appeared as if these words issued from the back of the beak of the owl. Clocks, 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 whir, 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 in a low tone. The king of the mice has a sharp ear, sing him his old song. Strike, 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 clocks all. Sound his last hour, for his fate is nigh at hand. And then, dong, dong, dong. The clock struck 12 in a hollow and gloomy tone. Mary was very much frightened. She began to shudder from head to foot, and she was about to run away from the room when she beheld Godfather Drosselmeyer seated upon the clock instead of the owl, the two skirts of his coat having taken the place of the drooping wings of the bird. At that spectacle Mary remained nailed as it were to the spot, with astonishment, and she began to cry, saying, What are you doing up there, Godpapa Drosselmeyer? Come down here and don't frighten me like that, naughty Godpapa Drosselmeyer. But at these words there began a sharp whistling and furious kind of tittering all around. Then in a few moments Mary heard thousands of little feet treading behind the walls, and next she saw thousands of little lights through the joints in the wainscot. When I say little lights, I am wrong. I mean thousands of little eyes. Mary full well perceived that there was an entire population of mice about to enter the room. And in fact, in the course of 5 minutes, thousands and thousands of mice made their appearance by the creases of the door and the joints of the floor, and began to gallop hither and thither, until at length they ranged themselves in order of battle, as Fritz was wont to draw upon his wood soldiers. All this seemed very amusing to Mary, and as she did not feel towards mice that absurd alarm which so many foolish children experience, she thought she should divert herself with the sight, when there suddenly rang through the room a whistling so sharp, so terrible, and so long that a cold shudder passed over her. At the same time, a plank was raised up by some power underneath, and the king of the mice, with 7 heads, all wearing gold crowns, appeared at her very feet in the midst of the mortar and plaster that was broken up. And each of his 7 mouths began to whistle and scream horribly, while the body to which those 7 heads belonged forced its way through the opening. The entire army advanced toward the king, speaking with their little mouths 3 times in chorus. Then the various regiments marched across the room, directing their course towards the cupboard, and surrounding Mary on all sides, so that she began to beat a retreat. I have already told you that Mary was not a timid child, But when she saw herself surrounded by crowds of mice, commanded by that monster with 7 heads, fear seized upon her, and her heart began to beat so violently that it seemed as if it would burst from her chest. Her blood appeared to freeze in her veins, her breath failed her, and half fainting she retreated with trembling steps. At length, purr, and the pieces of the panes in the cupboard, broken by her elbow which knocked against it, fell upon the floor. She felt at that moment an acute pain in the left arm, but at the same time her heart grew lighter, for she no longer heard that squeaking which had so much frightened her. Indeed, everything had again become quiet around her. The mice had disappeared, and she thought that, terrified by the noises of the glass which was broken, they had sought refuge in their holes. But almost immediately afterwards a strange noise commenced in the cupboard, and numerous little sharp voices exclaimed, "To arms! To arms! To arms!" At the same time, the music of Godfather Drosselmeyer's country house, which had been placed upon the top shelf of the cupboard, began to play, and on all sides she heard the words, "Quick! Rise to arms! To arms!" Mary turned round. The cupboard was lighted up in a wondrous manner, and all was bustle within. All the harlequins, the clowns, the punches, and the other puppets scampered about, while the dolls set to work to make lint and prepare bandages for the wounded. At length the Nutcracker himself threw off all the clothes and jumped off the bed, crying, "Foolish troop of mice! Return to your holes, or you must encounter me!" But at that menace a loud whistling echoed through the room, and Mary perceived that the mice had not returned to their holes, but that, frightened by the noise of the broken glass, they had sought refuge beneath the chairs and tables, whence they were now beginning to issue again. On his side, Nutcracker, far from being terrified by the whistling, seemed to gather fresh courage. "Despicable king of the mice!" he exclaimed. "It is thou, then! Thou acceptest the death which I have so long offered you? Come on, and let this night decide between us. And you, my good friends, my companions, my brethren, if it be indeed true that we are united in bonds of affection, support me in this perilous contest. On! On! Let those who love me follow." Never did a proclamation produce such an effect. 2 harlequins, a clown, 2 punches, and 3 other puppets cried out in a loud tone, "Yes, my lord, we are yours in life and death. We will conquer under your command, or die with you." At these words, which proved that there was an echo to his speech in the heart of his friends, Nutcracker felt himself so excited that he drew his sword, and without calculating the dreadful height on which he stood, leapt from the second shelf. Mary, upon perceiving that dangerous leap, gave a piercing cry, for Nutcracker seemed on the point of being dashed to pieces, when Miss Clara, who was on the lower shelf, darted from the sofa and received him in her arms. "Ah, my dear little Clara," said Mary, clasping her hands together with emotion, how have I mistaken your disposition?" But Miss Clara, thinking only of the present events, said to the Nutcracker, "What, my lord, wounded and suffering as you are plunging headlong into new dangers. Content yourself with commanding the army, and let the others fight. Your courage is known, and you can do no good by giving fresh proof of it." And as she spoke, Clara endeavored to restrain the gallant Nutcracker by holding him tight in her arms, but he began to struggle and kick in such a manner that Miss Clara was obliged to let him glide down. He slipped from her arms and fell on his knees at her feet in a most graceful manner, saying, "Princess, believe me, that although a certain period you were unjust towards me, I shall always remember you, even in the midst of battle." Miss Clara stooped as low down as possible, and taking him by his little arm, compelled him to rise. Then taking off her waistband, all glittering with spangles, she made a scarf of it, and sought to pass it over the shoulder of the young hero. But he, stepping back a few paces and bowing at the same time in acknowledgment of so great a favor, untied the little white ribbon with which Mary had bound up his chin, and tied it round his waist, after pressing it to his lips. Then, light as a bird, he leapt from the shelf on the floor, brandishing his saber all the time. Immediately did the squeakings and creakings of the mice begin over again, and the king of the mice, as if to reply to the challenge of the Nutcracker, issued from beneath the great table in the middle of the room, followed by the main body of his army. At the same time, the wings, on the right and left, began to appear from beneath the armchair under which they had taken refuge. "What are you doing, Boo?" She's just sitting here behind the chair. Let me catch up. I think Dad of War won Game of the Year at the Game Awards, yes. It deserves it from what I've seen. Did you pass me again? Oh, you're talking about God of War? I have no idea what that's about. What's the premise of God of War? What kind of game is it? I don't even know. Yeah, I have no idea what you guys are talking about, but talk amongst yourselves, enjoy your conversation, because I have no clue. But feel free to enlighten me about what God of War is, because I obviously don't know. You know what? I'm on a live stream for the music right now on YouTube. And I don't know if they're going to tag me for copyright stuff. Music is copyrighted. Okay. I shall continue the story. The battle. Trumpets, sound the charge! Drums, beat the alarm! Exclaimed the valiant Nutcracker. And at the same moment the trumpets of Fritz's hussars began to sound, while the drums of his infantry began to beat, and the rumbling of cannon was also heard. At the same time, a band of musicians was formed with fat Figaros with their guitars, Swiss peasants with their horns. I didn't decide what I was going to do about this. It says Negroes with their triangles. And while it's not the worst word, it's not the best. So, I don't know if, like, I should say... I don't know what I should say. I don't know what would be most respectful. And to be true to the story and what the history is, I guess I should say it, but obviously I wouldn't say that in daily conversations, so. I think there's only a couple more times it says it, so you can just say people. Yeah. Or men, I guess. I don't know. Thank you, Terry. And all these persons, though not called upon by the Nutcracker, did not the less begin to descend from shelf to shelf, playing the beautiful march of the British Grenadiers. The music no doubt excited the most peaceably inclined puppets, for at the same moment a kind of militia, commanded by the beadle of the parish, was formed, consisting of harlequins, punches, clowns, and pantaloons. Arming themselves with anything that fell in their way, they were soon ready for battle. All was bustle, even to a man-cook, who, quitting his fire, came down with a spit, on which was a half-roasted turkey, and went and took his place in the ranks. The Nutcracker placed himself at the head of this valiant battalion, which, to the shame of the regular troops, was ready first. I must tell you everything, or else you might think that I am inclined to be too favorable to that glorious militia. And therefore I must say that if the infantry and cavalry of Master Fritz were not ready so soon as the others, it was because they were all shut up in 4 boxes. The poor prisoners might therefore well hear the trumpet and drum which called them to battle. They were shut up and could not get out. Mary heard them stirring in their boxes, like crayfish in a basket, but in spite of their efforts, they could not free themselves. At length the grenadiers, less tightly fastened in than the others, succeeded in raising the lid of their box, and then helped to liberate the light infantry. In another instant, these were free, and well knowing how useful cavalry is in battle, they hastened to release the hussars, who began to canter gaily about and range themselves 4 deep upon the flanks. But if the regular troops were thus somewhat behindhand, in consequence of the excellent discipline in which Fritz maintained them, they speedily repaired the lost time, for infantry, cavalry, and artillery began to descend with the fury of an avalanche, amidst the plaudits of Miss Rose and Miss Clara, who clapped their hands as they passed, and encouraged them with their voices, as the ladies from whom they were descended most likely were wont to do in the days of ancient chivalry. Meantime, the king of the mice perceived that he had to encounter an entire army. In fact, the Nutcracker was in the center of his gallant band of militia. On the left was the regiment of hussars, waiting only the moment to charge. On the right was stationed a formidable battalion of infantry, while upon a footstool which commanded the entire scene of battle was a park of 10 cannon. In addition to these forces, a powerful reserve, composed of gingerbread men and warriors made of sugar of different colors, had remained in the cupboard, and already began to bustle about. The king of the mice had, however, gone too far to retreat, and he gave the signal by a squeak, which was repeated by all the forces under his command. At the same moment, the battery on the footstool replied with a volley of shot amongst the masses of mice. The regiment of hussars rushed onward to the charge, so that on one side the dust raised by their horses' feet, and on the other the smoke of the cannon, concealed their plain of battle from the eyes of Mary. But in the midst of the roar of cannon, the shouts of the combatants, and the groans of the dying, she heard the voice of the Nutcracker ever rising above the din. "Sergeant Harlequin," he cried, "take 20 men, and fall upon the flank of the enemy. Lieutenant Punch, form into a square. Captain Puppet, fire in platoons. Colonel of Hussars, charge in masses and not 4 deep as you are doing. Bravo, good leaden soldiers, bravo! If all my troops behave as well as you, the day is ours." But by these encouraging words even, Mary was at no loss to perceive that the battle was deadly, and that the victory remained doubtful. The mice, thrown back by the hussars, decimated by the fire platoons, and shattered by the park of artillery, returned again and again to the charge, biting and tearing all who came in their way. It was like the combats in the day of chivalry, a furious struggle foot to foot and hand to hand, each one bent upon attack or defense, without waiting to think of his neighbor. Nutcracker vainly endeavored to direct the evolutions in a disciplined manner and form his troops into dense columns. The hussars, assailed by numerous corps of mice, were scattered and failed to rally around their colonel. A vast battalion of enemy had cut them off from the main body of their army, and had actually advanced up to the militia, which performed prodigies of valor. The beadle of the parish used his battle axe most gallantly. The man-cook ran whole ranks of mice through with his spit. The leaden soldiers remained firm as a wall, but Harlequin and his 20 men had been driven back, and were forced to retreat under cover of the battery. And Lieutenant Punch's square had been broken up. The remains of his troops fled and threw the militia into disorder, and Captain Puppet, doubtless for want of cartridges, had ceased to fire, and was in full retreat. In consequence of this backward movement through the line, the park of cannon was exposed. The king of the mice, perceiving that the success of the fight depended upon the capture of that battery, ordered his bravest troops to attack it. The footstool was accordingly stormed in a moment, and the artillerymen were cut to pieces by the side of their cannon. One of them set fire to his powder wagon and met a heroic death with 20 of his comrades. But all this display was useless against numbers, and in a short time a volley of shot, fired upon them from their own cannon, and which swept the forces commanded by the Nutcracker, convinced him that the battery of the footstool had fallen into the hands of the enemy. From that moment the battle was lost, and the Nutcracker now thought only of beating an honorable retreat. But in order to give breathing time to his troops, he summoned the reserve to his aid. Thereupon the gingerbread men and the corps of sugar warriors descended from the cupboard and took part in the battle. They were certainly fresh, but very inexperienced troops. They were fresh troops, get it? Haha. The gingerbread men especially were very awkward, and hitting right and left did as much injury to friends as to enemies. The sugar warriors stood firm, but they were of such different natures, emperors, knights, Tyrolese peasants, gardeners, cupids, monkeys, lions, and crocodiles, that they could not combine their movements, and were strong only as a mass. Their arrival, however, produced some good, for scarcely had the mice tasted the gingerbread men and the sugar warriors when they left the leaden soldiers, whom they found very hard to bite, and turned also from the punches, harlequins, beetles, and cooks, who were only stuffed with bran, to fall upon the unfortunate reserve, which in a moment was surrounded by thousands of mice, and after a heroic defense, devoured arms and baggage. Nutcracker attempted to profit by that moment to rally his army, but the terrible spectacle of the destruction of the reserve had struck terror to the bravest hearts. Captain Puppet was as pale as death. Harlequin's clothes were in rags. A mouse had penetrated into Punch's hump, and, like the youthful Spartan's fox, began to devour his entrails, and not only was the colonel of the hussars a prisoner with a large portion of his troops, but the mice had even formed a squadron of cavalry by means of horses thus taken. Hi, Shannon. The unfortunate Nutcracker had no chance of victory left. He could not even retreat with honor, and therefore he determined to die. He placed himself at the head of a small body of men, resolved like himself to sell their lives dearly. In the meantime, terror reigned among the dolls. Miss Clara and Miss Rose wrung their hands and gave vent to loud cries. "Alas!" exclaimed Miss Clara, "must I die in the flower of my youth? I, the daughter of a king, and born to such brilliant destinies?" "Alas!" said Miss Rose, "am I doomed to fall into the hands of the enemy and be devoured by the filthy mice?" The other dolls ran about in tears, their cries mingling with those of Miss Clara and Miss Rose. Meanwhile, matters went worse and worse with Nutcracker. He was abandoned by the few friends who had remained faithful to him. The remains of the squadron of hussars took refuge in the cupboard. The leaden soldiers had all fallen into the power of the enemy. The cannoneers had long previously been dispersed, and the militia was cut to pieces like the 300 Spartans of Leonidas, without yielding a step. Nutcracker had planted himself against the lower part of the cupboard, which he vainly sought to climb up. He could not do so without the aid of Miss Rose or Miss Clara, and they had found nothing better to do than to faint. Nutcracker made a last effort, collected all his courage, and cried in an agony of despair, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" But as in the case of Richard III, his voice remained without even an echo, or rather betrayed him to the enemy. 2 of the rifle brigade of the mice seized upon his wooden cloak, and at the same time the king of the mice cried with his 7 mouths, "On your heads, take him alive! Remember that I have my mother to avenge. This punishment must serve as an example to all future Nutcrackers." And with these words the king rushed upon the prisoner. But Mary could no longer support that horrible spectacle. "Oh, my poor Nutcracker!" she exclaimed. "I love you with all my heart, and cannot see you die thus." At the same moment, by a natural impulse, and without precisely knowing what she was doing, Mary took off one of her shoes, and threw it with all her force in the midst of the combatants. Her aim was so good that the shoe hit the king of the mice, and made him roll over in the dust. A moment afterwards, king and army, conquerors and conquered, all alike disappeared, as if by enchantment. Mary felt the more severe pain than before in her arm. She endeavored to reach an armchair to sit down, but her strength failed her, and she fainted. Okay, hello. Hi, Shannon. Welcome for joining. How are you? Good to see you. Thank you for waiting patiently. A horse is a horse, of course. I don't see Kitty. My kingdom for a horse. Okay. I shall continue on the illness. When Mary awoke from her deep sleep, she found herself lying in her little bed, and the sun penetrated radiant and brilliant through the windows. By her side was seated a gentleman whom she shortly perceived to be a surgeon named Vondelstern, and who said in a low voice the moment she opened her eyes, "She is awake." Then the judge's wife advanced toward the bed, and gazed upon her daughter for a long time with an anxious air. "Ah, my dear mamma!" exclaimed little Mary upon seeing her mother. "Are all those horrible mice gone, and is my poor Nutcracker saved?" "For the love of heaven, my dear Mary, do not repeat all that nonsense," said the lady. "What have mice, I should like to know, to do with a Nutcracker? But you, naughty girl, have frightened us all sadly, and it is always so when children are obstinate and will not obey their parents. You played with your toys very late last night. You most likely fell asleep, and it is probable that a little mouse frightened you. At all events, in your alarm, you thrust your elbow through one of the panes of the cupboard and cut your arm in such a manner that Mr. Vandelstern, who has just extracted the fragments of glass, declares that you ran a risk of cutting an artery and dying through loss of blood. Heaven be thanked that I awoke, I know not at what o'clock, and that, recollecting how I had left you in the room, I went down to look after you. Poor child! You were stretched upon the floor near the cupboard, and all around you were strewed the dolls, the puppets, the punches, the leaden soldiers, pieces of the gingerbread men, and Fritz's hussars, all scattered about pell-mell, while in your arms you held the Nutcracker. But how was it that you had taken off one of your shoes, and that it was at some distance from you?" "Ah, my dear mother," said Mary, shuddering as she thought of what had taken place, "all that you saw was caused by the great battle that took place between the puppets and the mice. But the reason of my terror was that I saw the victorious mice about to seize upon the poor Nutcracker, who commanded the puppets, and it was then that I threw my shoe at the king of the mice. After that I know not what happened." The surgeon made a sign to the judge's lady, who said in a soft tone to Mary, "Do not think any more of that, my dear child. All the mice are gone, and the little Nutcracker is safe and comfortable in the glass cupboard." The judge then entered the room, and conversed for a long time with the surgeon, but of all that they said Mary could only catch these words, "It is delirium." Mary saw immediately that her story was not believed, but that it was looked upon as fable, and she did not say any more upon the subject, but allowed those around her to have their own way, for she was anxious to get up as soon as possible and pay a visit to the poor Nutcracker. She, however, knew she had escaped safe and sound from the battle, and that was all she cared about for the present. Nevertheless, Mary was very restless. She could not play on account of her wounded arm, and when she tried to read or look over her picture books, everything swam so before her eyes that she was obliged to give up the task. The time hung very heavily upon her hands, and she looked forward with impatience to the evening, because her mamma would come and sit by her, and tell her pleasant stories. One evening, the judge's wife had just ended the pretty tale of Prince Vicardin, when the door opened, and Godfather Drosselmeyer thrust in his head, saying, "I must see with my own eyes how the little invalid gets on." But when Mary perceived Godfather Drosselmeyer with his glass wig, his black patch, and his drab frock coat, the remembrance of the night when the Nutcracker lost the famous battle against the mice returned so forcibly to her mind that she could not prevent herself from crying out, "Oh, Godpapa Drosselmeyer, you were really very ugly. I saw you quite plainly when you were astride upon the clock, and when you covered it with your wings to prevent it from striking, because it would have frightened away the mice. I heard you call the king with the 7 heads. Why did you not come to the aid of my poor Nutcracker, naughty Godpapa Drosselmeyer? For by not coming, you were the cause of my hurting myself and having to keep to my bed." The judge's wife listened to all this with a kind of stupor, for she thought that the poor little girl was relapsing into delirium. She therefore said in a low tone of alarm, "What are you talking about, Mary? Are you taking leave of your senses?" "Oh, no," answered Mary, "and Godpapa Drosselmeyer knows that I'm telling the truth." But the godfather, without saying a word, made horrible faces, like a man who was sitting upon thorns. Then all of a sudden he began to chant these lines in a gloomy, sing-song tone. "Old clock bell, beat, low, dull, and hoarse. Advanced, retreat, thou gallant force. The bell's lone sound proclaims around the hour of deep midnight, and the piercing note from the screech owl's throat puts the king himself to flight. Old clock bell, beat, low, dull, and hoarse. Advanced, retreat, thou gallant force." Mary contemplated Godfather Drosselmeyer with increasing terror, for he now seemed to her more hideously ugly than usual. She would indeed have been dreadfully afraid of him if her mother had not been present, and if Fritz had not at that moment entered the room with a loud shout of laughter. "Do you know, Godpapa Drosselmeyer," said Fritz, "that you are uncommonly amusing today? You seem to move about just like my punch that stands behind the store, and as for the song, it is not common sense." My dear doctor, she said, "your song is indeed very strange and appears to me to be only calculated to make little Mary worse." Oh, sorry, that was supposed to be read in a normal voice. "Nonsense," cried Godfather Drosselmeyer. "Do you not recognize the old chant which I am in the habit of humming when I mend your clocks?" At the same time he seated himself near Mary's bed and said to her in a rapid tone, "Do not be angry with me, my dear child, because I did not tear out the 14 eyes of the King of the Mice with my own hands, but I knew what I was about, and now, as I am anxious to make it up with you, I will tell you a story." "What story?" asked Mary. "The history of the Krakatuk Nut and Princess Pirlipata. Do you know it?" "No, my dear godpapa," replied Mary, whom the offer of a story reconciled to the doctor that moment. "Go on." "My dear doctor," said the judge's wife, "I hope that your story will not be so melancholy as your song." "Oh no, my dear lady," returned Godfather Drosselmeyer. "On the contrary, it is very amusing." "Tell it to us, then," cried both the children. Godfather Drosselmeyer accordingly began in the following manner. So now, this comes the part where we turn to a story within the story. Storyception. And it's pretty long, but there are different parts. So I'm going to keep going, but you just have to keep in mind this story is happening inside the story. Like, Godfather Drosselmeyer is telling this story to the children. So, look at me quoting Shakespeare. I didn't know that was Shakespeare. I figured it was shaky based on Richard III being mentioned in the reading immediately after. Yes, welcome for lurking. More than welcome to lurk. Let me check something real quick. It looks like I have a package delivered, so I'm gonna go get that real quick. So, please hold. I will be right back. Okay, hello, I've returned. I was safe. I just wanted to make sure I got the packages, because we've not had any issues, but I just don't want to leave packages outside too long. Okay, we shall continue with the story within the story. It is called The History of the Krakatuk Nut and Princess Pirlipata. How Princess Pirlipata was born, and how the event produced the greatest joy to her parents. There was lately, in the neighborhood of Nuremberg, a little kingdom, which was not Prussia, nor Poland, nor Bavaria, nor the Palatinate, and which was governed by a king. The king's wife, who was consequently a queen, became the mother of a little girl, who was therefore a princess by birth, and received the sweet name of Pirlipata. I hate that name. The king was instantly informed of the event, and he hastened out of breath to see the pretty infant in her cradle. The joy which he felt in being the father of so charming a child carried him to such an extreme that, quite forgetting himself, he uttered loud cries of joy and began to dance round the room, crying, "Oh, who has ever seen anything so beautiful as my perla pateta?" Then, as the king had been followed into the room by his ministers, his generals, the great officers of state, the chief judges, the counselors, and the... I don't know what this word is. Puisne? Judges? Can somebody look that up for me? They all began dancing around the room as the king, singing, "Great monarch, we ne'er in this world did see a child so fair as the one that there has been given to thee. O ne'er and o ne'er was there child so fair." And indeed, although I may surprise you by saying so, there was not a word of flattery in all this, for since the creation of the world, a sweeter child than Princess Perlipata never has been seen. Her little face appeared to be made of the softest silken tissue, like the white rosy tints of the lily combined. Here eyes were of the purest and brightest blue, and nothing was more charming than to behold the golden thread of her hair flowing in delicate curls over shoulders as white as alabaster. Moreover, Perlipata, when born, was already provided with 2 complete rows of the most pearly teeth, with which, 2 afters after her birth, she bit the finger of the Lord Chancellor so hard, when, being nearsighted, he stooped down to look close at her, that, although he belonged to the sect of Stoic philosophers, he cried out, according to some, "Oh, the Dickens!" Whereas others affirmed to the honor of philosophy that he only said, "Oh, oh." However, up to the present day, opinions are divided upon this important subject, neither party being willing to yield to the other. Indeed, the only point on which the Dickensonians and the Oists are agreed is that the princess really did bite the finger of the Lord High Chancellor. The country thereby learnt that there was as much spirit as beauty belonging to the charming Perlipata. Everyone was therefore happy in a kingdom so blessed by heaven, save the queen herself, who was anxious and uneasy, no person knew why. But what chiefly struck people with surprise was the care with which the timid mother had the cradle of the infant watched. In fact, besides having all the doors guarded by sentinels, in addition to the 2 regular nurses, the queen had 6 other nurses to sit around the cradle, and who were relieved by a half a dozen others at night. But what caused the greatest interest, and which no one could understand, was that each of these 6 nurses was compelled to hold a cat upon her knees, and to tickle it all night so as to prevent it from sleeping and keep it purring. I am certain, my dear children, that you are as curious as the inhabitants of that little kingdom without a name, to know why these extra nurses were forced to hold cats upon their knees, and to tickle them in such a way that they should never cease purring. But as you would vainly endeavor to find out the secret of that enigma, I shall explain it to you, in order to save you the headache which would not fail to be the result of your guesswork. It happened one day that half a dozen great kings took it into their heads to pay a visit to the future father of Princess Perlipata, for at that time the princess was not born. They were accompanied by the royal princes, the hereditary grand dukes, and the heirs apparent, all most agreeable personages. This arrival was the signal for the king whom they visited, and who was a most hospitable monarch, to make a large drain upon his treasury, and give tournaments, feasts, and dramatic representations. But this was not all. He having learnt from the intendant of the royal kitchen that the astronomer royal of the court was favorable for killing pigs, and the conjunction of the stars foretold that the year would be propitious for sausage making, the king commanded a tremendous slaughter of pigs to take place in the courtyard. Then, ordering his carriage, he went in person to call upon all the kings and princes staying in his capital, and invite them to dine with him, for he was resolved to surprise them by the splendid banquet which he intended to give them. On his return to the palace, he retired to the queen's apartment, and going to her, said in a coaxing tone, with which he was always accustomed to make her do anything he wished, "My most particular and very dear love, you have not forgotten, have you, how dotingly fond I am of black puddings? You surely have not forgotten that?" The queen understood by the first word what the king wanted of her. In fact, she knew by his cunning address that she must now proceed, as she had done many times before, to the very useful occupation of making, with her own royal hands, the greatest possible quantity of sausages, polonies, and black puddings. I also don't know this word. She therefore smiled at that proposal of her husband, for although filling with the dignity the high situation of queen, she was less proud of the compliments paid her upon the manner in which she bore the scepter and the crown than those bestowed on her skill in making a black pudding or any dish. She therefore contented herself by curtsying gracefully to her husband, saying that she was quite ready to make him the puddings which he required. The Grand Treasurer accordingly received orders to carry the immense enameled cauldron and the large silver saucepans to the royal kitchens, so that the queen might make the black puddings, the polonies, and the sausages. An enormous fire was made with sandalwood. The queen put on her apron of white damask, and in a short time delicious odors steamed from the cauldron. Those sweet perfumes spread through the passages, penetrated into all the rooms, and reached the throne room where the king was holding a privy council. The king was very fond of good eating, and the smell made a profound impression upon him. Nevertheless, as he was a wise prince, and was famed for his habits of self-command, he resisted for a long time the feeling which attracted him towards the kitchens. But at last, in spite of the command which he exercised over himself, he was compelled to yield to the inclination that now ruled him. "My lords and gentlemen," he accordingly said, rising from his throne, "with your permission I will retire for a few moments. Pray wait for me." Then this great king hastened through the passages and corridors to the kitchen, embraced his wife tenderly, stirred the contents of the cauldron with his golden scepter. Okay, this all sounds very promiscuous. Then this great king headed through the passage and corridors to the kitchen, embraced his wife tenderly, stirred the contents of the cauldron with his golden scepter, and tasted them with the tip of his tongue. Having thus calmed his mind, he returned to the council and resumed, though somewhat abstractedly, the subject of discussion. He had left the kitchen just at the important moment when the fat, cut up in small pieces, was about to be broiled upon the silver gridirons. The queen, encouraged by his praises, now commenced that important operation, and the first drops of grease had just dripped upon the live coals when a squeaking voice was heard to chant the following lines. "Dear sister, pray give to the queen of the mice a piece of that fat which is grilling so nice. To me a good dinner is something so rare that I hope of the fat you will give me a share." The queen immediately recognized the voice that thus spoke. It was the voice of Dame Mousie. Dame Mousie had lived for many years in the palace. She declared herself to be a relation of the royal family, and was queen of the kingdom of mice. She therefore maintained a numerous court beneath the kitchen hearthstone. The queen was a kind and good-natured woman, and although she would not publicly recognize Dame Mousie as a sister and a sovereign, she nevertheless showed her in private 1,000 flattering attentions. Her husband, more particular than herself, had often reproached her for thus lowering herself, but on the present occasion she could not find it in her heart to refuse the request of her little friend, and she accordingly said, "Come, Dame Mousie, without fear, and taste my pork fat as much as you like. I give you full leave to do so." Dame Mousie accordingly leapt upon the hearth, quite gay and happy, and took with her little paws the pieces of fat which the queen gave her. But behold! The murmurs of joy which escaped the mouth of Dame Mousie, and the delicious smell of the morsels of fat on the gridiron reached her 7 sons, then her relations, and next her friends, all of whom were terribly addicted to gormandizing, and who now fell upon the fat with such fury that the queen was obliged, hospitable as she was, to remind them that if they continued at that rate only 5 minutes more, there would not be enough fat left for the black puddings. But in spite of the justice of this remonstrance, the 7 sons of Dame Mousie took no heed of them, and setting a bad example to their relations and friends, rushed upon their aunt's fat, which would have entirely disappeared had not the cries of the queen brought the man-cook and scullery boys, all armed with brushes and brooms, to drive the mice back again under the hearthstone. But the victory, although complete, came somewhat too late, for there scarcely remained a quarter enough fat necessary for the polonies, the sausages, and the black puddings. The remnant, however, was scientifically divided by the royal mathematician, who was sent for in all possible haste, between the large cauldron containing the materials for the puddings, and the 2 saucepans in which the sausages and polonies were cooking. Half an hour after this event, the cannon fired, the clarions and trumpets sounded, and then came the potentates The royal princes, the hereditary dukes, and their heirs apparent to the thrones, all dressed in their most splendid clothes, and some riding on gallant chargers. The king received them on the threshold of the palace in the most courteous manner possible. Then, having conducted them to the banqueting room, he took his seat at the head of the table in his quality of sovereignhood, and having the crown upon his head and the scepter in his hand. The guests all placed themselves at table according to their rank, as crowned kings, royal princes, hereditary dukes, or heirs apparent. The board was covered with dainties, and everything went well during the soup and the first course. But when the polonies were placed on the table, the king seemed to be agitated. When the sausages were served up, he grew very pale, and when the black puddings were brought in, he raised his eyes to heaven, sighs escaped his breast, and a terrible grief seemed to rend his soul. At length he fell back in his chair and covered his face with his hands, sobbing and moaning in so lamentable a manner that all the guests rose from their seats and surrounded him with great anxiety. At length the crisis seemed very serious. The court physician could not feel the beating of the pulse of the unfortunate monarch, who was thus overwhelmed with the weight of the most profound, the most frightful, and the most unheard of calamity. At length, upon the most violent remedies, such as burnt feathers, volatile salts, and cold keys thrust down the back, had been employed, the king seemed to return to himself. He opened his eyes, and said in a scarcely audible tone, "Not enough fat." At these words, the queen grew pale in her turn. She threw herself at his feet, crying in a voice interrupted by sobs, "Oh, my unfortunate, unhappy, and royal husband! What grief have I not caused you by refusing to listen to the advice which you have so often given me? But you behold the guilty one at your feet, and you can punish her as severely as you think fit." "What is the matter?" demanded the king. "And what has happened that I not know of?" "Not enough fat." "Alas, alas," answered the queen, to whom her husband had never spoken in so cross a tone. "Alas, Dame Mousie, her 7 sons, her nephews, her cousins, and her friends devoured the fat." But the queen could not say any more. Her strength failed her. She fell back and fainted. What is this music? This is... This is Utada. This is no longer Christmas. Oh. This is Utada Hikaru. It's like Mr. Merry Christmas featuring Mr. Lawrence or something. I don't remember. This is not a Christmas song. I'm gonna have to go get Keegan soon. I was gonna look up the name of the song, but in light of the timing, I will keep going. Now it's not Utada. Okay. Anyways. No, it's not Charlie Brown Christmas music. Not, well, it's just like a live stream on YouTube. But that was definitely Utada. I'll post the song if I remember. Okay. But the queen could not say any more. Her strength failed her. She fell back and fainted. Then the king rose in a great rage, and cried in a terrible voice, "Let her ladyship, the royal housekeeper, explain what all this means. Come, speak." Then the royal housekeeper related all that she knew, namely, that being alarmed by the queen's cries, she ran and beheld the majesty beset by the entire family of Dame Mousy, and that, having summoned the cooks and scullery boys, the plunderers were compelled to retreat. The king, perceiving that this was a case of high treason, resumed all his dignity and calmness, and commanded the privy council to meet that minute, the matter being of the utmost importance. The council assembled, the business was explained, and it was decided by a majority of voices that Dame Mousy, being accused of having eaten the fat destined for the sausages, the polonies, and the black puddings of the king, should be tried for the same offense, and that if said Dame Mousy was found guilty, she and all her race should be banished from the kingdom, and all her good or possessions, namely, lands, castles, palaces, and royal residencies, should be confiscated. Then the king observed to his counselors that while the trial lasted, Dame Mousy and her family would have sufficient time to devour all the fat in the royal kitchens, which would expose him to the same privation as that which he had just endured in the presence of 6 crowned heads, without reckoning royal princes, hereditary dukes, and heirs apparent. He therefore demanded a discretionary power in respect to Dame Mousy and her family. The Privy Council divided for the form of the thing, but the discretionary power was voted, as you may well suppose, by a large majority. Then the king sent one of his best carriages, preceded by a courier, that greater speed might be used, to a very skillful mechanic who lived at Nuremberg, and whose name was Christian Elias Drosselmeyer. This mechanic was requested to proceed that moment to the palace upon urgent business. Christian Elias Drosselmeyer immediately obeyed, for he felt convinced that the king required him to make some work of art. Stepping into the vehicle, he traveled day and night until he arrived in the king's presence. Indeed, such was his haste that he had not waited to change the drab-colored coat which he usually wore. But instead of being angry at that breach of etiquette, the king was much pleased with his haste, for if the famous mechanic had committed a fault, it was in his anxiety to obey the king's commands. The king took Christian Elias Drosselmeyer into his private chamber, and explained to him the position of affairs, namely, that it was decided upon to make a striking example of the race of mice throughout the kingdom, that attracted by the fame of his skill, the king had fixed upon him to put the decree of justice into execution, and that the said king's only fear was lest the mechanic, skillful though he were, should perceive insurmountable difficulties in the way of appeasing the royal anger. But Christian Elias Drosselmeyer reassured the king, promising that in 8 days there should not be a single mouse left in the kingdom. In a word, that very same day he set to work to make several ingenious little oblong boxes, inside which he placed a morsel of fat at the end of a piece of wire. By seizing upon the fat, the plunderer, whoever he might be, caused the door to shut down behind him and thus become a prisoner. In less than a week, 100 of these boxes were made and placed not only beneath the hearthstone, but in all the garrets, lofts, and cellars of the palace. Dame Mousy was far too cunning and sagacious not to discover at the first glance the stratagem of Master Drosselmeyer. She therefore assembled her 7 sons, their nephews, and their cousins, to warn them of the snare that was laid for them. But after having appeared to listen to her, and the veneration which her years commanded, they withdrew, laughing at her terrors. Then, attracted by the smell of the fried pork fat, they resolved, in spite of the representations made to them, to profit by the charity that came they knew not whence. At the expiration of 24 hours, the 7 sons of Dame Mousy, 18 of her nephews, 50 of her cousins, and 235 of her other connections, without reckoning thousands of her subjects, were caught in the mousetraps and ignominiously executed. Then did Dame Mousy, with the remnant of her court and the rest of her subjects, resolve upon abandoning a place covered with the blood of her massacred relatives and friends. The tidings of that resolution became known and reached the ears of the king. His Majesty expressed his satisfaction, and the poets of the court composed sonnets upon his victory, while the courtiers compared him to Sesostris, Alexander, and Caesar. I have to show you one of these illustrations, because it's gruesome. Nope. Hello. Focus. They're the mice. They're the dead mice. Is what a picture of it is. I can't speak English, apparently. Yeah, those are the dead mice. Anyways, We shall continue. The queen was alone anxious and uneasy. She knew Dame Mousie well, and suspected that she would not leave unavenged the death of her relations and friends. And in fact, at that very moment when the queen, by way of atoning for her previous fault, was preparing with her own hands a liver soup for the king, who doted upon that dish, Dame Mousie suddenly appeared and chanted the following lines. Thine husband, void of pity and of fear, hath slain my cousins, sons, and nephews dear. But list, O queen, to the decrees of fate, the child which heaven will shortly give to thee, and which the object of thy love will be, shall bear the rage of my vindictive hate. Thine husband owneth castles, cannons, towers, a council's wisdom, and an army's powers. Mechanics, ministers, mousetraps, and snares, none of all these, alas, to me belong, but heaven hath given me teeth sharp, firm, and strong, that I may rend in pieces royal heirs. Having sung these words, she disappeared, and no one saw her afterwards. But the queen, who expected a little baby, was so overcome by the prophecy that she upset the liver soup into the fire. Thus, for the second time, was Dame Mousie the cause of depriving the king of one of his favorite dishes, whereat he fell into a dreadful rage. He, however, rejoiced more than ever at the step he had taken to rid his country of the mice. It is scarcely necessary to say that Christian Edward Drosselmeyer... They changed his name! It's supposed to be Christian Elias. It says Christian Edward. Christian Edward Drosselmeyer was sent away rewarded, and returned in triumph to Nuremberg. Oops. Okay, let me see how long the next section is. Yeah, it's pretty long. Okay. This is where we're going to have to stop. Because I need to pick up Keegan. Unfortunately, that was only like an hour of reading. Well, unless there's like a good... I don't know. Maybe there's a good spot to stop. Should I keep going? It's about to get really good. If you want to, I'd like to listen. I'll go as far as I can. Okay. Okay. How, in spite of the precautions taken by the queen, Dame Mousie accomplishes her threat in regard to Princess Pirlipat. And now, my dear children, you know as well as I do wherefore the queen had Princess Pirlipat watched with such wonderful care. She feared the vengeance of Dame Mousie, for, according to what Dame Mousie had said, there could be nothing less in store for the heiress of this little kingdom without a name than the loss of her life, or at all events her beauty, which last affliction is considered by some people worse for one of her sex. What redoubled the fears of the queen was that the machines invented by Master Drosselmeyer were totally useless against the experience of Dame Mousie. The astronomer of the court, who was also grand prophet and grand astrologer, was fearful lest his office should be suppressed unless he gave his opinion at this important juncture. He accordingly declared that he read in the stars the great fact that the illustrious family of the cat Murr was alone capable of defending the cradle against approach of Dame Mousie. It was for this reason that each of his 6 nurses was forced to hold the cat constantly upon her knees. Those cats might be considered as under-officers attached to the court, and the nurses sought to lighten the cares of the duty performed by the cats by gently rubbing them with their fair hands. You know, my dear children, that there are certain times when a person watches, even while actually dozing, and so it was that one evening, in spite of all the efforts which the 6 nurses made to the contrary, As they sat round the cradle of the princess with the cats upon their knees, they felt sleep rapidly gaining upon them. Now, as each nurse kept her own ideas to herself, and was afraid of revealing them to their companions, hoping all the time that their drowsiness would not be perceived by others, the result was that, one after another, they closed their eyes, their hands stopped from stroking the cats, and the cats themselves, being no longer rubbed and scratched, profited by circumstance to take a nap. I cannot say how long this strange slumber had lasted, when, towards midnight, one of the nurses awoke with a start. All the others were in a state of profound lethargy. Not a sound, not even their very breathing was heard. The silence of death reigned around, broken only by the slight creak of the worm biting the wood. But how frightened was the nurse when she beheld a large and horrible mouse standing up near her on its hind legs, and having plunged its head into the cradle, seemed very busy in biting the face of the princess. She rose with a cry of alarm, and at that exclamation all the other nurses jumped up. But Dame Mousie, for she indeed it was, sprang towards one corner of the room. The cats leapt after her. Alas, it was too late. Dame Mousie had disappeared by a crevice in the floor. At that same moment, Princess Pirlipada, who was awoke by all that din, began to cry. Those sounds made the nurses leap with joy. "Thank God," they said. "Since Princess Pirlipada cries, she is not dead." They then all ran towards the cradle, but their despair was great indeed when they saw what had happened to that delicate and charming creature. In fact, instead of that face of softly blended white and red, that little head with its golden hair, those mild blue eyes, azure as the sky itself, instead of all these charms, the nurses beheld an enormous and misshapen head upon a deformed and ugly body. Her two sweet eyes had lost their heavenly hue, and became goggle, fixed, and haggard. Her little mouth had grown from ear to ear, and her chin was covered with a beard like grizzly cotton. All this would have suited old Punch, but it seemed very horrible for a young princess. At that moment the queen entered. The 12 nurses threw themselves with their faces against the ground, while the 6 cats walked about to discover if there were not some open window by which they might escape upon the tiles. At the sight of her child, the despair of the poor mother was something frightful to behold, and she was carried off in a fainting fit into the royal chamber. But it was chiefly the unhappy father whose sorrow was the most desperate and painful to witness. The courtiers were compelled to put padlocks upon the windows for fear he should throw himself out, and they were also forced to line the walls with mattresses lest he should dash out his brains against them. His sword was of course taken away from him, and neither knife nor fork nor any sharp or pointed instruments were left in his way. Okay. Bye, Terry. Thank you for popping in. It's good to see you. It's always good to have you. I hope you have a good rest of your evening. This was the most easily effected, inasmuch as he ate nothing for the 2 or 3 following days, crying without ceasing, "Oh, miserable king that I am! Oh, cruel destiny that thou art!" Perhaps, instead of accusing destiny, the king should have remembered that, as is generally the case with mankind, he was the author of his own misfortunes, for had he known how to content himself with black pudding containing a little less fat than usual, and had he abandoned his ideas of vengeance and left Dame Mousie and her family in peace beneath the hearthstone, the affliction which he deplored would not have happened. But we must confess that the ideas of the royal father of Princess Pirlipada did not tend at all in that direction. On the contrary, believing, as all great men do, that they must necessarily attribute their misfortunes to others, he threw all that blame upon the skillful mechanic Christian Elias Drosselmeyer. Well convinced, moreover, that if he invited him back to court to be hung or beheaded, he would not accept the invitation, he desired him to come in order to receive a new order of knighthood which had just been created for men of letters, artists, and mechanics. Master Drosselmeyer was not exempt from human pride. He thought that a star would look well upon the breast of his drab surtout coat. And accordingly set off for the king's court. But his joy was soon changed into fear, for on the frontiers of the kingdom guards awaited him. They seized upon him and conducted him from station to station until they reached the capital. The king, who was afraid of being won over to mercy, would not see Master Drosselmeyer when the latter arrived at the palace. but he ordered him to be immediately conducted to the cradle of Pirlipada, with the assurance that if the princess were not restored by that month to her former state of beauty, he would have the mechanic's head cut off. Master Drosselmeyer did not pretend to be bolder than his fellow men, and had always hoped to die a natural death. He was therefore much frightened at this threat. Nevertheless, trusting a great deal to his knowledge, which his own modesty had never prevented him being aware of to its full extent, he acquired courage. Then he set to work to discover whether the evil would yield to any remedy, or whether it were really incurable, as he had from the first believed it to be. With this object in view, he skillfully took off the head of the princess and next all her limbs. He likewise dissected the hands and feet in order to examine, with more accuracy, not only the joints and the muscles, but also the internal formation. But alas, the more he worked into the frame of Pirlipada, the more firmly did he become convinced that as the princess grew, the uglier she would become. He therefore joined Pirlipada together again, and then seating himself by the side of her cradle, which he was not to quit until she had resumed her former beauty, he gave way to his melancholy thoughts. The 4th week had already commenced, and Wednesday made its appearance when, according to custom, the king came in to see if any change had taken place in the exterior of the princess. But when he saw that it was just the same, he shook his scepter at the mechanic, crying, "Christian Elias Drosselmeyer, take care of yourself. You have only 3 days left to restore me my daughter just as she was wont to be, and if you remain obstinate in refusing to cure her, on Monday next you shall be beheaded." Master Drosselmeyer, who could not cure the princess, not through any obstinacy on his part, but through actual ignorance how to do it, began to weep bitterly, surveying with tearful eyes Princess Pirlipada, who was cracking nuts as comfortably as if she were the most beautiful child upon the earth. Then, as he beheld that melting spectacle, the mechanic was struck for the first time by that particular taste for nuts which the princess had shown since her birth, and he remembered also the singular fact that she was born with teeth. In fact, immediately after her change from beauty to ugliness, she had begun to cry bitterly, until she found a nut near her. She had then cracked it, eaten the kernel, and turned around to sleep quietly. From the moment that nurses had taken good care to fill their pockets with nuts, and give her one or more whenever she made a face. I will show you a picture of the princess. There she is, in all her loveliness. Isn't she handsome looking? I'm going to try to finish this section, since I'm trying to read it pretty quickly. "Oh, instinct of nature, eternal and mysterious sympathy of all created beings!" cried Christian Elias Drosselmeyer. "Thou showest me the door which leads to the discovery of thy secrets. I will knock at it, and it will open." At these words, which surprised the king, the mechanic turned towards his majesty and requested the favor of being conducted into the presence of the astronomer of the court. The king consented, but on condition that it should be with a guard. Master Drosselmeyer would perhaps have been better pleased to take that little walk all alone, but as under the circumstances he could not help himself, he was obliged to submit to what he could not prevent, and processed through the streets of the capital escorted like a felon. On reaching the house of the astrologer, Master Drosselmeyer threw himself into his arms, and they embraced each other amidst torrents of tears, for they were acquaintances of long standing, and were much attached to each other. They then retired to a private room, and examined a great number of books which treated upon likings and dislikings, and a host of other matters not a whit less profound. At length, night came, and the astrologer, ascending to his tower, and aided by Master Drosselmeyer, who was himself very skillful in such matters, discovered, in spite of the difficulty of the heavenly circles which crossed each other in all directions, that in order to break the spell which rendered Princess Pirlipada hideous, and to restore her former beauty, she must eat the kernel of the Krakatuk nut, the shell of which was so hard that the wheel of a 48-pounder might pass over it without breaking it. Moreover, it was necessary that this nut should be cracked in the presence of the princess, and by a young man who had never been shaved, and who had always worn boots. Lastly, it was requisite that he should present the nut to the princess with his eyes closed, and in the same way step 7 paces backward without stumbling. Such was the answer of the stars. Drosselmeyer and the astronomer had worked without ceasing for 4 days and 4 nights to clear up this mysterious affair. It was on the Sunday evening. The king had finished his dinner and was just beginning on the dessert when the mechanic, who was to be beheaded the next day, entered the royal dining room full of joy and announced that he had discovered the means of restoring Princess Pirlipata to her beauty. At these news, the king caught him in his arms with the most touching kindness and asked him what those means were. And the mechanic thereupon explained to the king the result of his consultation with the astrologer. "I knew perfectly well, Master Drosselmeyer," said the king, "that all your delay was only through obstinacy. It is, however, settled at last, and after dinner we will set to work. Take care, then, dearest mechanic, to have the young man who has never been shaved and who wears boots in readiness in 10 minutes, together with a Nutcracker. Let him, moreover, abstain from drinking wine for the next hour, for fear he should stumble while walking backwards like a crab. But when once it is all over, tell him that he is welcome to my whole cellar, and may get as tipsy as he chooses." But to the great astonishment of the king, Master Drosselmeyer seemed quite frightened at these words, and as he held his tongue, the king insisted upon knowing why he remained silent and motionless instead of hastening to execute the orders of his sovereign. "Sire," replied the mechanician, throwing himself on his knees before the king, "it is perfectly true that we have found the means of curing Princess Pirlipata, and that those means consist of her eating a Crackatuck nut, when it shall have been cracked by a young man who has never been shaved and who has always worn boots. But we have not as yet either the young man or the nut. We know not where to find them, and in all probability we shall have the greatest difficulty in discovering both the nut and the Nutcracker." At these words, the king brandished his scepter above the head of the mechanician, crying, "Then hasten to the scaffold!" But the queen, on her side, hastened to kneel by the side of Master Drosselmeyer, and begged her august husband to remember that by cutting off the head of the mechanician, he would but be losing even that ray of hope which remained to them during his lifetime. That the chances were that he who had discovered the horoscope would also find the nut and the Nutcracker. That they ought to believe more firmly in the present prediction of the astronomer, inasmuch as nothing which he had hitherto prophesied had ever come to pass, but that it was evident his presages must be fulfilled some day or another, inasmuch as the king had named him his grand prophet, and that as the princess was not yet of an age to marry, she being now only 3 months old, and would not even be marriageable until she was 15, there was consequently a period of 14 years and 9 months during which Master Drosselmeyer and the astrologer might search after the Crackatuck nut and the young man who was to break it. That was the longest freaking sentence in the world. The queen therefore suggested that a reprieve might be rewarded to Christian Elias Drosselmeyer, at the expiration of which he should return to surrender himself into the king's power, whether he had found the means of curing the princess or not, and either to be generously rewarded or put to death without mercy. The king, who was a very just man, and who on that day especially had dined splendidly upon his 2 favorite dishes, namely liver soup and black puddings, lent a favorable ear to the prayer of his wise and courageous queen. He therefore decided that the astrologer and the mechanician should that moment set out in search of the nut and the Nutcracker, for which purpose he granted 14 years and 9 months, with the condition that they should return, at the expiration of that reprieve, to place themselves in his power, so that if they were empty-handed he might deal with them according to his own royal pleasure. If, on the contrary, they should make their reappearance with a Crackatuck nut, which was to restore the princess to all her former beauty, the astrologer would be rewarded with a yearly pension of 600 pounds and a telescope of honor, and the mechanician would receive a sword set with diamonds, the Order of the Golden Spider, the Grand Order of the State, and new frock coat. As for the young man who was to crack the nut, the king had no doubt of being able to find one suitable for the purpose, by means of advertisements constantly inserted in the national and foreign newspapers. Touched by this declaration on the part of the king, which relieved them from half the difficulty of their task, Christian Elias Drosselmeyer pledged his honor that he would either find the Crackatuck nut or return, like another Regulus, to place himself in the hands of the king. That same evening, the astrologer and the mechanician departed from the capital of the kingdom to commence their researches. That is a great place to stop. That is where we will stop. Woo! Kind of hard to read, but I really like it. I think this is really cute. Okay. Hello, Riddy. I already said hi to you, I don't know why. I think I missed stuff, hang on. Denoting a judge, so however you say it. Puny? Denoting a judge of a superior court, inferior in rank to chief justices. Okay. Was there a question about that word? I'm just writing down words that I'm not sure about, like how to pronounce or their definition. Google for the win. I hope you are doing well, Riddy. A dry, partly cooked sausage made of various ingredients: liver, polony, cervelet, I don't know, bologna sausage. Okay. Bologna sausage was what I got when I looked up polony. Large, smooth textured smoked sausage of beef and veal and pork. The highly processed meat, locally called polony, is known for its fluorescent artificial color. Fluorescent meat? I see it says it might have been brought from Bologna. I guess Bologna is technically brought from... Okay, bologna. I guess bologna is technically sausage. Meat talk. Meat talk. Blech. Not enough fat! Okay, I need to post that song. I like the song that was played. I'll send it to you. Sounds normal to me. Man's overcoat of a style similar to a frock coat. Surtout. Okay. She looks like the Queen of Hearts. Off with their heads. Sounds cracking. That's a few conditions. Yeah, just a few. Word hype. I just showed up right when you wrote the word. Oh. Well, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it, and I hope you're enjoying the story. I find it pretty interesting. I think it's pretty cute, and it's fun to read. I'm not sure when the next stream will be. It could be tomorrow or Thursday. Or Friday, for that matter. Maybe all of the days. I don't know. And we'll go for however long it takes us to finish. I'm already on page 78, and the story's like 142 pages long. So, I mean, it's not super long. And after that, I'm not sure what we'll do. So, maybe I'll take a poll. Probably continue Nancy Drew, but yeah. Thank you guys for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and happy holidays to you all. Okay, bye.